Steven Crowder. So Steven Crowder went to the barbershop, and if you're not familiar, the barbershop is a sacred place in the Black community. The barbershop is where you go to get roasted, but it's also where you go to have real conversations about the culture. And if you don't believe me, just watch this clip.
Three things that black people need to tell the truth about.
What?
One, Rodney King should have got his ass beat for driving drunk and being grown in a Hyundai. Two, OJ did it. And three, Rosa Parks ain't do nothing but sit her black ass down. That's right, I said it.
Now that is going to be controversial because everybody does know who Rosa Parks is, and if you're not sure or if you're not familiar with this story, I think there was another Black woman who did do what Rosa Parks did. She didn't get enough publicity, and then Rosa Parks happened, but I believe this was like a planned event or a planned thing what they were doing. This wasn't something that happened organically where she was just tired one day and just didn't want to get up. This was planned.
Not only is what you're saying not true, it is wrong and disrespectful for you to discuss Rosa Parks in that way.
Exactly. Wait. Hold on here. Is this the barbershop? Is this the barbershop?
Yes,
it's the barbershop.
Yes.
I mean, we can't talk street in the barbershop. Then where can we talk street? We can't talk street nowhere else. Nobody exempt in the barbershop. You know that. Ain't nobody exempt. You can talk about whoever and whatever, whenever you want to in the barbershop.
Why you gotta tear
Facts.
us down like this, Eddie? You know you're wrong. Keep on walking. I'll tell you one thing. You better never let Jesse Jackson hear you talking about that.
Man, fuck Jesse Jackson. Three things that black people...
This is heyybritny. Welcome back. Okay, so let's get into the vibes of this discussion. So I'm not sure of the other participant's name, so I am just going to refer to one guy as the guy with the glasses. So I'm not trying to be offensive when I say that, but I do want to make sure that you guys are crystal clear on why I'm referring to them by descriptors. So the guy with the glasses, he was sort of having a different debate, and you could see that in Crowder's reaction because the guy was talking. At times, Crowder looked either frustrated or that this conversation wasn't quite going in the way that he wanted to, or he was just having to kind of wait until the guy was done speaking to say what he really wanted to say. And so in that sense, I feel like they were having two different conversations where the guy with the glasses, he was approaching it as if he wanted to have like a really intellectual debate, whereas Crowder was more so just trying to throw stats out there and kind of lecture to the people in the barbershop about how the white culture sees things. And I think as a white person, he does have that right to kind of either represent the white community or advocate on behalf of the white community, being that he is one of, I think, 3 people who are white people in this discussion. And then also there are 2 white women who are in the background, and it's a little bit distracting because they keep shifting sides. I'm not sure who they are, but I just think it's funny that you have 2 white women in this Black barbershop. It's not super relevant, but that was something that caught my eye. Now let's get into what they're discussing or debating. Crowder is really trying to bring up the point that white people are coming up in a time where they are feeling like they don't have a voice, they don't matter, they can't say anything if they have a disagreement with somebody in the Black community or with the Black community in general. And so what he's really trying to argue is that white people have no power, they are institutionally powerless, and they have become radicalized because of this. And what I find interesting is that this is, and I'm really going to try not to say interesting so much in this video, but if I do, I apologize. So this caught my eye because what you're really seeing in 2025 and maybe 2020 through 2025 is a reversal of everything that happened in the 1960s with the civil rights era, where basically it was Black people who were being terrorized by white people, and it was Black people who didn't have as much of a voice as white people did, right? And so you're really seeing the reversal of that, and it's really 1865 to about 2020 where white people have had the upper hand or the advantages when it comes to Black people. And to explain what I mean by that, because if you have a white person who can't get into a school, it's not the end of the world. They have other opportunities, whereas Black people, they've always had less opportunities to begin with. Now, that doesn't mean that some Black people haven't been successful or that Black people in general haven't accomplished anything, but typically the status quo is that Black people have less advantages or less opportunities compared to white people. So just because a white person doesn't get one particular opportunity or doesn't get opportunities in general, that doesn't mean that they are getting less opportunities than Black people. They're just not getting as many opportunities, and the playing field is a little bit more level, because people really look at it as white people are here, black people are here. Affirmative action, DEI should bring it to about here. But now what Crowder is basically arguing is that white people are down here and black people are up here. And you can say that in some sense because black people are able to kind of have more opportunity or they get away with doing certain stuff, but it's really not that sort of power imbalance that I think everybody thinks it is. Now, I want to get into reparations, and we're going to lead with another clip from the movie The Barbershop.
We don't need reparations, all right? We need restraint.
Restraint?
Restraint.
Man,
some discipline.
Whatever.
Don't go out and buy a Range Rover when you living with your mama. And pay your mama some rent. And can we please try and teach our kids something other than the Chronic album? And please, black people, be on time for something other than free before 11 at the club.
Drink time right there, baby.
You know what? That was a passionate and surprisingly well articulated.
Okay, so that was the main part that I wanted you guys to hear, but I am going to continue to let it play, even though the second part is not really relevant, but it speaks to the dynamics between these two black men.
Related argument.
You mocking me?
Not at all, sir. I applaud your virtuosity.
You know what, schoolboy, for your information? A scallop is a shellfish.
No, I'm afraid it isn't.
No, I'm afraid it is. Because it's a mollusk. Before it comes to your dinner plate, it got 2 shells wrapped around it just like a clam.
Okay, so the reason why I wanted to play that part of the clip because it speaks to the dynamic between someone who is considered educated and someone who is considered to be uneducated, and you're really going off of appearances to determine that. And so I don't know the character's name, like I cannot recall, but I think this is Sean Patrick Thomas, and he's the guy from Save the Last Dance. And so he's the educated guy, he's schoolboy in this situation, and so he's supposed to have all of this knowledge and be smarter than everybody else and be well read and all of that stuff. And then Michael Ealy's character, he is supposed to be the street dude, kind of not educated, and so here he is showing up this guy, and you can almost compare it to the black conservative versus the black liberal, whereas people feel like these are two completely different groups of black people who just see the world in a different way. And so it just kind of reminded me of that dynamic, and so I wanted to play it for that reason. So let's get into reparations because this is a hot topic. Some people think that reparations should be owed. Some people think that it shouldn't be. And I do believe that reparations should be owed. I'm not going to focus on that so much. I want to focus more on things that have been done in the name of reparations. So reparations is not the same thing as giving people equal rights. People should have equal rights, and that should have been like that from the beginning. So everything from 1865 and even 1960 is not really reparations. It's just restoring a power imbalance that never should have been in place to begin with. In addition, reparations should have been given in 1865, and the reason why I say that is because 1865, when slavery ended and black people were free, there was no other time where black people were in more poverty or more disenfranchised or more kind of at the state of having nothing, literally because they are enslaved. They have no opportunities for success. They're not able to make money, all of that, right? And so there was no better time to give black people reparations than then. However, they did not do that. They were supposed to give black people 40 acres and a mule, but that was overturned or that was reversed by the next president. And that is a huge problem because you see that white people, as Crowder is arguing, are paying for that now, even though they had nothing to do with slavery or they have ancestors who were not slave owners. And that kind of goes back into that whole conversation of saying, oh, well, only 2% of white people own slaves. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. I also want to argue that welfare is not reparations because I did see this in a comment on either this video or another video where someone was basically saying, it might have been a Twitter post actually, but anyway, someone was saying that welfare is a form of reparations because black people have been using welfare, we've been paying into it and all of that stuff, right? And I don't think that that is a good explanation of what reparations is or that that's proof of reparations because that is welfare is a system that is set up for everyone to benefit from. It's not specifically for black people. Anybody can take advantage of that. White people, Asian people, Hispanic people, black people, right? And to put this into better context, when you owe somebody money, you may want to give them, or they may want the cash back, like the actual cash, or they may want items that match that cash value. And it really just depends on who that person is and what their need is is at the time. Do they need the actual cash, or are they okay with getting something that represents that cash value? To go further, welfare definitely is not reparation because welfare is conditional. You only get welfare if you have X living conditions. So in other words, if you are low income, if you are in poverty, you get welfare. So if you're not in that condition, you don't benefit from welfare. So it doesn't apply to all Black people. Not all Black people are in poverty. Not all Black people are in crime-ridden areas, right? And so you cannot say that welfare is something that benefits Black people as a whole. It just benefits some people, and it benefits people who are not Black as well. So I really want to stress that reparations should have been given in 1865 when Black people were the most down and out, literally because they were enslaved, they had no opportunities for success, and that was the best time to pay Black people back for the forced labor that contributed to the wealth of the United States of America. There was also this idea of giving Black people land, and I want to say that giving Black people land in 2020, 2025, anything around this time period is not the same thing as giving people land back in 1865 or any time before 1900. And the reason why I say that is I want to point to Yellowstone, the TV show. I love to bring TV shows into my videos, and so the Duttons are the main characters in the Yellowstone TV show. So they have Yellowstone 1983 and then also 1923, if I'm getting the titles correct. And in 1883 is where we see the Duttons acquire the land that later became Yellowstone. And so to put this into perspective, they got that land in 1883 and they basically had it until 2025. I don't know what the time frame is for Yellowstone. It might be like 2015. So we'll just say 2015. But they had that land from 1883 to 2015, so they had all that time to benefit from the wealth that the land would have given them, right? And the opportunity to invest in businesses, partnerships, all of that stuff, right? And so when you give people land in 2025, they're not going to have the same opportunities or the same advantages that people had back in 1883, and that is why it's so significant that Black people should have been given land in 1865, whatever, around that time period, so that they would have benefited from all of those changes that were happening between 1865 and 2015, 2020, that sort of thing. So what I'm hitting on is that Black people missed out on those opportunities to accumulate wealth during the early stages of America's development, and it's always easier to invest in something at the very beginning. So think, for example, Bitcoin. You can buy Bitcoin now, but you're not going to get the same advantages as if you bought Bitcoin 10 to 15 years ago. In addition, this is like boomers getting mad at millennials and Gen Z for being too lazy or not wanting to work hard to get whatever boomers had. Boomers don't realize that they have so many advantages that millennials and Gen Z don't have. So even if we are striving for the same thing in 2020, 2025, it's not going to be the same thing just because this is a completely different climate. And so I really want to stress that giving Black people reparations in 2025 should be given, but it's not going to mean the same thing if it had been given back in 1865. Moving on, let's talk about schools. So I really like this point of Crowder bringing up that we spent $3 trillion in the school system. And what he's pointing out is that math scores are lower despite us spending all of this money to improve the education system and to educate Black kids. So let's go ahead and play a clip of them talking about this.
Go ahead. Over $3 trillion adjusted for inflation, right? The Department of Education, early 70s. Okay, before that, they were run by states. Over $3 trillion. What are math scores? What are literacy scores now? In both
depends on what part of the country you're asking that about.
Correct.
So that was just a very short clip, but what I want to hit at is that what he's basically saying is that we spent all of this money on education, it didn't get us anywhere. And again, education doesn't just benefit Black people, it benefits all Americans. So this is not a form of reparations for Black people or a way of kind of making up for the wrong that was done to Black people through the form of chattel slavery. So I don't think that you can say that just because this particular thing is not producing the results that it should based on how much money went into it. I think that this is not a fair representation of saying that reparations will work or it won't work. And I think that for reparations, you have to give it directly to the Black people, directly to the Black community if you really want to see a difference in the Black community and Black households and Black schools and all of that stuff. You can't give the money to these institutions and kind of expect a trickle down effect and then kind of be mad at the results that you're getting, because again, that didn't go directly to Black people. You just try to fix the whole thing instead of fixing really where the areas were broken. I also really like the explanation of charter schools because I didn't really understand what the frustration or the pushback was on it, because what he was basically saying is that instead of giving money to these institutions, to the schools, you give that money to the child, to the family, and then they can use that money at whatever school they want. And they were saying that the problem with this is that if you are still in a bad area or a low income area, you may not have the transportation or the access to the schools that you want to go to just because of where you live. And there is a TV show, Forever. I've done a video on this, and there is this one scene where the Black girl, Keisha, she is going to a private school, and I'm not sure where it is, but I believe she takes the city bus to get to that school. And there's this one scene where she is late, like she didn't get up in time to take the bus to school, and her mother had to take her, and her mother was upset because she was going to be late for work in order to take her daughter to school. So that's one example of parents having to navigate the stressors of being a parent, but also working these jobs and not really being able to kind of not necessarily monitor their kids, but they're not able to be as involved in making sure that these kids are able to get to where they need to go and that they are in the right environment. And so with that example of Keisha, we see the opposite situation with Justin. He lives in $1 million home. His parents are rich, that sort of thing. And we do see a scene where his mother is taking them to school. She's dressed for work, and she obviously has the time to take them to school. And I don't know if her schedule is different, whatever, but we can see those two different situations where the mom, she's a single parent. She is just stressed out trying to provide for her household. And then you have this other mom. She is just able to do everything and be there for her kids and all of that stuff. And so you can really see how the Black community is impacted depending on where they live. So I want to play a clip of them talking about this just so that you can kind of understand it coming from the people having this discussion.
Some of these school events, I'm questioning them, like, how the hell y'all expect us to have jobs and still transport these kids to and from these events all throughout the day? But if them people down there had to do it,
so you think what we're doing now is better?
Because they ain't got transportation. Half of them ain't got transportation.
So just to tie this all together, this is related to the conversation of having charter schools, but then that's not going to work out because kids won't have access to those schools through transportation. And he's talking about how stressful it is for the parents because they're working all day and then they're expected to take their kids to these schools and these different events, and it's just not possible. And that points to the breakdown of the nuclear family and two-parent household, because you should really be able to have a stay-at-home mom who can take the kids to school and there are different sporting events and all of that stuff while the dad is at work making money, providing for the family, right? And so because you don't have that, this is what you get, the situation where parents can't do it all because they're literally the only parent, or they have to work and work does not allow them to just stop in the middle of the day to take their kid to X place because it's an emergency. Like, you can call out of work, but you do get penalized for that, right? And so this current society is not set up so that you can have a nuclear family with a stay-at-home mom who can be hands-on and involved in the child's life and in the child's school life so that they are aware of what's going on and they can properly raise children. Moving on, they talked about violence, and what Crowder is trying to argue is that white people are 12 times more likely to be killed by a Black person. So they're basically saying that white people are in danger of being killed by a Black person more so than a Black person is at risk of being killed by a white person. I think it would be more accurate if it was said as you are 12 times more likely to be killed, assaulted, whatever, by a certain type of Black person. In other words, you're more likely to be assaulted by a Black person who is a violent criminal, right? Not all Black people commit crimes. Not all Black people are violent. And so when you say, oh, you're 12 times more likely to be killed by a Black person, that is ignoring a lot of context and nuances, because not every Black person is going to try to kill a white person, and not every white person is going to try to kill a Black person, right? And so you are missing those those nuances when you're just repeating stats that kind of don't show the full picture. This brings me to one of two moments that were pretty funny throughout this debate. This is pointing out the hypocrisy of Crowder saying, hey, white people are 12 times more likely to be killed by a black person, because he is calling out Crowder for putting himself around black people.
That's what I'm trying to tell you. The tension is already there. White people are afraid to go in black neighborhoods because
so should black people be afraid to go to school because a white person go come shoot the school up?
Right.
Because every time we see that, that's what keeps happening.
It's not even close.
Church.
But now you're going to ignore. Now you're going to ignore that.
I'm scared to go to church.
You're scared to go to church, but you're sitting in the barbershop with almost 12 black men. Come on, Steve. Now let's be realistic.
Who do you think's more at risk sitting down right here?
Exactly. He know he's not in danger around us.
No, I'm much more risk.
We don't do that.
And here's the irony.
I'm surprised that they didn't just bust out laughing when he said that, because you're saying that you as a white person are 12 times more likely to be killed by a black person, and I don't even know how he doubled that number by being around 12 black men or whatever, but you just increased your odds of being assaulted or killed by a black person and nothing happened to you, right? And so that's why context and those nuances matter, because obviously he is not in any danger and he's around way more black people than you would think someone would be around if they truly are scared of being killed by a black person. So I thought that that was good of them to call that out and draw attention to the fact that he's able to sit in a room, he's safe, nothing is happening to him, and that's going to come up later. So I want to make sure that we talk about this part of the interview or this part of the debate now. I also thought it was interesting that he pointed out that he was scared to go to church, and while they're having this part of the conversation, Charlie Kirk does come up and he's basically talking about, I'm scared to go to church, my friend was just killed, and all of that stuff, and they're also going to talk about that a little bit later. But I really just want to hit home the hypocrisy of this moment and saying white people are scared of black people because of those statistics, but he's fine to sit in this environment because he's obviously not in any danger at all. Now let's get into the Charlie Kirk of it all. Someone else did bring up Charlie Kirk, and I wasn't quite sure what exactly he was going to say, so I did not know how the conversation was going to play out, and I don't think he said anything crazy, and more so what he spoke to was the fact that Charlie Kirk was killed by a white man, because again, they're trying to argue, like, you're not in danger from black people. Black people, the average black person is not out here trying to kill you, and they're pointing out, hey, Charlie Kirk was killed by a white person. That's a white people thing, and then they're also saying that points to how white people, because of the history of America in terms of slavery, white people thinking that they are more superior to black people, that sort of thing. And when you have families that have that mindset and they pass it down, and so what they were saying with Charlie Kirk's killer is that his family, I think they were saying that his family is conservative, but obviously the son was either rebelling against what his upbringing was, or he just went wrong somewhere and wasn't believing what the family believed and all of that stuff. And so what he's basically saying is that when you have these people who are scared of other races or whatever, a lot of that is passed down through what your family is telling you and how they're warning you about certain situations. And then also some of that has nothing to do with race, where it's interracial killings, assaults, and all of that stuff. It has nothing to do with like the black community and all of that stuff. And so I found that to be interesting, because it is fair to point that out, because white people still do face violent actions from other white people. We always focus more on white people assaulting black people, killing black people, or black people assaulting and killing white people. At some point in this conversation, there was one guy, this is a guy with the dreads, he might be like the shop owner or something like that, but he was the one who was doing the most talking at first, and then other people started to chime in, and he was basically saying that when you have poverty, that's when you have crime, and I can agree with that, because rich people or rich areas, they have lower crime, not no crime, just lower crime, whereas low income, crime-ridden areas, that is where you are going to see the most crime. And in this particular country, the people who are low income happen to be minorities, so minorities are going to commit more of a crime, but it's not because minorities are violent, it's because of the circumstances that they are in. Now, there are some people who are black and they're just going to be violent because that's whatever they went through, whatever they grew up with, whatever caused them to be like that. but there's other situations where people are kind of forced into violence. And then on the opposite end, if you live in more affluent areas, neighborhoods, that sort of thing, you are less likely to be involved in crime. So I do think that the level of wealth that you have, that directly correlates to whether or not you are going to see more crime or see less crime. They also brought up Irina Zaruska, and basically what Steven Crowder is trying to argue is that this was a black person and it was a race-motivated crime. And then also I think he was bringing up how the black judge let him out because of restorative justice and wanting to kind of right the wrongs done to black people and all of this stuff. And so he was really trying to hit home, but this is a black issue. And that one guy with the dreads, he was like, no, she wasn't killed because he was a black man. She was killed because he was crazy. He does add in that racial tension when he was heard on camera saying, I got that white girl. And so I think that you can say that two things are true at once, and it doesn't just have to be, oh, this only happened because he was a black man and she was a white girl. So hopefully that makes sense. So I want to go back to the idea of restorative justice, and I had a really good clip for this, but I wasn't able to clip it, and it's from the movie Sunset Park, because Crowder is talking about how this judge let Irina Zaruska's killer out after being arrested 14 times, and if we had judges like this woman in Sunset Park, I think that we would be dealing with a completely different society. And this clip, what she's basically saying is because one of the main characters, Shorty, he was like defending some girl and he shot some guy, so he had to go to court, and the lawyer, because he played basketball, the lawyer was a friend of his coach and was basically trying to get him like a lenient sentence or whatever. And so the judge addresses him and she's like, it's not good to be a little bad. You can't stand on both sides of the fence. You can't be a little good and a little bad. You can't carry guns, play basketball, sell drugs, and do all of that stuff. And she's saying it's not enough to be a little bit good. You have to be all good or it's goodbye. She's going to throw him to the wolves. And she's saying, they are there waiting for you, and probation is a privilege. So if a lot of people heard that and understood like, hey, this judge is not playing around, I'm going to go to prison and it's not going to be good. And if you think about the movie of the Central Park 5, I can't think of what it's called now, but when you see what Corey Wise went through and you have that in the back of your mind when you're in this situation where someone's telling you like, hey, you better be all good or we're going to throw you to the wolves, that's what you're dealing with. And a lot of people I don't think realize that. And so you do need judges to be like this judge in Sunset Park. Now, the controversy here is that she let him out instead of locking him up, right? But we don't know if Teresa Stokes had this energy when she was talking to the guy who stabbed Irina Zaruska, or if she was just like, hey, you're black, you've had it hard, I'm gonna let you out, that sort of thing. We don't really know, or at least I don't really know how she handled that conversation with him, and I do think that that is worth a discussion. If you have judges like this judge in Sunset Park and she's actually being really strict and hard on him, even though she's technically letting him off, she is going to hold him to his actions. She's going to say like, hey, I'm letting you go free, but if you do something, you're going to be right back here and you're going to actually go to jail where you're going to have a very hard and difficult time. And so I just thought that that was relevant, so I wanted to bring that up because they're talking about restorative justice and basically this idea of the court system, because it was wrongfully arresting black people, giving them harsher sentences. They want to course correct and over course correct in order to make up for systemic racism towards black people in terms of incarcerating black men. Moving on, let's talk about policing. So George Floyd came up and Crowder was basically saying, hey, people see George Floyd differently because the body cam footage was released, and he was basically saying, he was a violent criminal, he was violent towards women, and so he's pointing out this idea of people thought that body cams were going to reveal all of this racism and prove that cops or whatever were racist towards black people or they were being treated differently. And one guy did bring up that you've seen videos all the time of white people acting crazy and the police are extra nice to them, whereas if a black person does it, you get shot or whatever. And so there's two things I want to say to that. one, I'm not surprised that body cam footage wouldn't reveal racism like 100 times out of 100, because you obviously know that you're being watched, and when you know that you're being watched, you're going to behave differently unless you're just so racist that you don't care if it's caught on camera and you know that you're going to get off, right? And so I think that plays into it as well. Like if you had secret body cams or secret recordings that nobody knew about, you may see something very different. And so I don't know if we'll ever have that, but I do think it's interesting that he is arguing that the body cams don't reveal what everybody expected to see. But at the same time, everybody knows that there's cameras everywhere. And so there's times when you see people just openly shooting people in broad daylight, well, they should know that something is recording them and what they're doing, right? And so there's, again, some people who literally just do not care. It is all about expressing their racism, killing somebody, assaulting somebody, because it makes them feel good or whatever, right? And so that's just pretty crazy. And to counter the narrative with George Floyd, someone did bring up Trump's crime, and I do want to point out that white-collar crimes, even though he was accused of sexual assault and that was a civil case, that's very different from violent crimes. Usually they say with white-collar crimes, there's no victims. It's more of like an institutional crime versus people physically being harmed in some way because of what you did. But like, if you steal money from a bank and that's other people's money, then obviously those people are going to be affected. But it's very different from violent crimes where you just see what happens with that. And so I don't know if that is a good pushback, because again, these are two different types of crime. In terms of policing, I thought the guy with the glasses, he brought up this situation because he is blind, and he was basically saying, hey, Steve, when you came in here, I don't know if you heard the thing say left or right, I'm blind, I'm disabled, and there's government programs that help me to get what I need basically as a disabled person. And he was pointing out that I guess he was in a car with somebody, they got pulled over, and because he's blind, he felt like he had to announce himself and make sure that the other people or the cops knew that he was blind so that they wouldn't shoot him or think that he was doing something that he was not doing, literally because he can't see, right? And so he wanted to make sure that they were aware of his status. And so I would obviously have to do the same thing as a deaf person, because if you're giving me orders and I can't understand you and what you're saying, then I'm obviously not going to do what you asked me to do. And so that is a very scary situation. So it is sad when you think about disabled people having to do that to make sure that they aren't put in compromising situations when it comes to interacting with the police. But I also think that there is a history here of, because our parents went through some of the situations that they are warning us about, like they actually went through those situations, they've raised us to be hyper aware of those situations. So going back to the movie Forever, Justin's mom, I can't think of her name, but she was basically scared for her son because she didn't want him to have any type of interaction with the police where he could end up dead. And so she was always kind of like warning him about this or lecturing him about this. And he was dropping his girlfriend off, and a police car just happened to show up behind him. And he started having a panic attack because he didn't know what was going to happen. And he wasn't even doing anything wrong. It's not like he had drugs or anything like that in the car. He was just a normal kid just driving a whatever car. I don't know what kind of car he had, but anyway, he was just driving his car and he freaked out because of what his mom had always been warning him about. And there is a good and a bad that comes with that. It's good that you prepare your kid for any situation, but it's bad because you make them have this anxiety about a situation that may not even go the way that you think it will, because you're thinking negatively about the situation. So the bad side of that is that whenever you interact with a cop, you're always going to be thinking of the worst case scenario instead of hoping for the best or expecting the best, expecting to be treated well. And that is a difficult position to be in, because you should be able to have an interaction with a cop and not lose your life, not be assaulted, unless you are doing something crazy, unless you are resisting arrest, unless you are breaking laws, right? And lastly, the other thing that came up was affirmative action and DEI. And so basically they were talking about how affirmative action wasn't really needed, or Crowder was saying that it wasn't really needed because Black people were already getting into spaces, and then affirmative action is just really to make sure that they continue to get into spaces. And then DEI is super confusing to me, because I know that we have affirmative action. I don't know why we need DEI on top of that. On top of that, we also have the negative associations with DEI where people people are saying, hey, you know, DEI is about letting underqualified people get ahead of people who are qualified. And I know that that's one argument, where the other argument is that no, these are two qualified people. You're picking the person who is a minority or a different gender over what you would normally pick when both people are qualified for the job. And so I have mixed feelings on that, because affirmative action, that should be there. You should not allow anybody to be discriminated based on their gender, their religion, their race, that sort of thing, right? But with DEI, it kind of goes a step further than that, and it's almost like that reversal in terms of what we were seeing in the 1960s, where Black people couldn't use the same water fountain as white people, couldn't use the same bathrooms, that sort of thing, and you could really feel the power imbalance. And so I feel like we're kind of in that situation with DEI, and that's why white people are pushing back so hard. But it's so interesting, because from 1865 to 1960, the 1960s, you had Black people dealing with that power imbalance, and from 2020 to 2025, white people did not last very long dealing with that power imbalance, where they are on the short end of a stick. And so that's just super interesting, because we should be about fairness and equality, and I would really like to see it to where everyone gets treated based on how they act and their character versus their skin color or their gender. Alrighty, so that's everything that I wanted to talk about in this video. I did think that this was a good debate, and they actually left us on a cliffhanger, so this conversation continues, and I am interested in seeing where this goes, because again, this is something that Steven Crowder does, and he has an older video where he went to the barbershop for the first time. I actually have not watched that or seen that, and I'm not sure if I'm going to, but I am interested in seeing where part 2 goes, because with this first part, a lot of people were in the comments, and they were really upset about how the Black people were responding in this conversation and making excuses and all of that stuff. And I don't really think that they were making excuses, but I do think that there were areas where they pointed out valid things that were not being addressed or were being ignored in favor of saying, hey, you know, white people are fed up and all of that stuff, right? And so there is context and nuance that is not always brought to the table when we're having these conversations, and that gives us a very skewed perspective of what we're actually talking about when it comes to race relations in America. So let me know what you thought about this barbershop appearance from Steven Crowder. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.